Get ready before life happens. The podcast helping you navigate life's what ifs.
Welcome to Get Ready Before Life Happens, Navigating Life's What Ifs. I'm your host, Tony Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Eric Blake. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Tony. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, myself as well. So, let's jump in. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story and how did it inspire your current mission to help women live their retirement on their terms?
Well, I'll start my response the same way I start every podcast episode, and that is that I would not be the man I am today without the women in my life. And that starts really with my mom. I was raised by a single mother. You think back to all the sacrifices that our parents make in general, but think about the way a single mom. I think about everything she went through. Navigating life on her own with a child. And so it starts there. And then, of course, being raised by a single mother, my grandparents were very influential in my life. In fact, my grandfather, he's the man I call daddy. I never actually knew my biological father.
Wow.
And so I was with my grandparents a lot. But unfortunately, my grandfather passed away when my grandmother was only 62. And she's 91 today. She actually will turn at 91. She turns 91 in April. And she is we call that matriarch of the family. That is her. And she's been there. She's been through, you think about now almost 30 years as a widow. And I go back and look at those challenges that both of those women in my life faced and say, how could I have made those journeys easier in some way? Because you think about the world that they're in, about you're making these big financial decisions. You got raising a child, and now you get all these other financial decisions you got to make. And you think about the challenges and the struggles that come along with that, not having that other person, that other partner in your life to help talk about ideas, to talk about goals, and think through some of these things, and it all falls on your shoulder. So that is really what has driven me, is how can I be that trusted advisor to walk along that path with women who have gone through similar experiences. And that's really what drives me today.
Well, that's an awesome mission, and it ties into where we want to go with the rest of the conversation. And people who watch and listen to this podcast have heard other guests talking about this as a need for women to understand their money, because there is a strong likelihood that a woman is going to become a widow or divorced and will be in charge of her own money at some point. So today is the best day to start prepping for that eventuality. And as you point out, is like your grandmother's had a 30-year journey on her own. So that's, that's a substantial time. So,
Right.
the next question I want to talk to you about, because this kind of cues up the whole thing, is what is the great wealth transfer? Everybody's heard the term. I'm not sure everybody knows exactly what it's talking about. And how is that going to impact women?
Well, I think it's interesting. You have to point out, I think everybody in our world has heard the term. In the financial services space, has heard this term about the great wealth transfer, because it's become this buzzword that over the next 5 to 10 years or so, there's going to be a huge transition of wealth from maybe the baby boomer generation down to Gen X and Gen Y and so on. But that's really what it entails. Is there's over the next few years, we've got these big chunks of wealth that have been accumulated again by the older generations that ultimately are going to start passing down. And from the women's perspective, a lot of that, a significant portion of that wealth is going to be transitioned to women. Now, there's a number of different reasons why that will be. Obviously, some of it is exactly what I said, inheritance from their parents. But a good amount of it, because of this life expectancy difference between women and men, is going to be simply the husband passes away, and now those assets become 100% owned by the wife. But you also have a number of really cool circumstances around business owners. There's more and more women are starting businesses, building wealth that way. And then ultimately there's a life transition where they sell that business. And now there's another influx of wealth. And so that's really what this wealth transfer is about, is there's trillions of dollars that are expected to be passed down over the next 5 to 10 years. And again, a significant portion of that wealth is going to be in the hands of women. which is going to change a lot, honestly. It's, you think about the way our world works economically, that could shift dramatically in the next few years as more and more women have their take responsibility for these assets and this wealth.
Yeah, and what I've heard from other guests, especially the female financial planners, is that women invest differently and manage their money differently. That they're more values aligned than necessarily the technical investing that a lot of financial planners have focused their practice around. What are you seeing in your practice with how women manage their money?
My interpretation is that women manage the money, typically often manage the money the way you should. And what I mean by that is it's tying it to goals, not the money. The money itself can't be the goal. More money is not a viable goal, not a viable financial goal. It's just having more money because there's never an end point. There's never hey, I achieved this. Where women often make the decisions around money on what can this do for my family? What's important to me? And that's the really, quite honest, that's the way you should be making financial decisions is how can I use this tool, money, as a resource to achieve these other things, to give myself security, to provide for my family, to spend more time with my family. What are the things that are truly important to me, and how can I use money as a vehicle to get me there?
Yeah, and that's what I've noticed in my practice too, is that women tend to ask the question is like, okay, is my family going to be okay? Is this, what I need? Am I going to have enough money in retirement? Or whatever. I was more of an insurance consultant, so I didn't really get into the financial planning side of things, but I worked with financial planners. So as part of the conversations, and, the estate planning, the same thing, are we going to have money for the grandkids? And all that. So yeah, that's definitely something I saw as well. Um, so as we talk about it, one of the things that makes it challenging is for women in retirement is that women have the pay gap. They have sometimes years where they're missing from the workforce because they're caregivers, either of their children or of their parents. Caregiving tends to fall more often on the women than on the men. How does that change their retirement journey?
Well, the biggest impact is often a result of when you miss years in the workforce for whatever reason, whether it was taking time out of the workforce early on to raise children, taking time out of the workforce later on to take care of family, parents. A lot of times, it often falls on the shoulders of the oldest daughter, right? And so you end up with less earnings years, which impacts Social Security benefits. It impacts savings amounts. You're able to typically you might have saved less. There's less money in the wife's name. And where it becomes a challenge is that when we think about again life expectancy, the odds are that the wife is going to outlive the husband. And so when you think about the decisions that are being made, historically at least, men have often fallen in that role as the primary decision maker when it comes to finances. And that's really where I would encourage women to take an active responsibility, take an active role in those conversations. This is more of a divorce situation, but I'll just share just a quick story about we had a lady that reached out to us not long ago. Unfortunately, they're about to go through a divorce. They've been married for 20 years. And her exact words were, well, he's had a financial advisor since we originally got married. 20 years, keep that in mind. I've never had a conversation with him. Now, there's any number of ways we can blame certain people, whoever you want to blame. There's easy ways to find blame in that scenario, regardless. The financial advisor, the husband, and actually to some extent, the wife need to say, hey, why am I not having why am I not part of these conversations? Why am I not in these meetings? And saying, it's going to ultimately be me as the wife that's going to be most impacted negatively if I'm not part of those conversations. So I think when we're talking about all these different circumstances, it behooves the women to take an active role, be part of those conversations, especially when it comes to something as important like Social Security. Social Security it gets a bad rap and maybe rightly so, but for many people, it's the single source of lifetime guaranteed income that actually increases with inflation as well. And so the decisions you make with Social Security become so critical, but a lot of times they're made by the guy who says, "Hey, I'm done. I'm going to retire. I'm going to start my Social Security at 62." Well, he's gone a few years later, and now she's got another 10, 15, 20 years to live on her own and impacted by the decisions that he made. And so we start thinking about being part of that conversation and how can we improve education and give women a better experience when it comes to retirement planning and financial planning.
Yeah, and I think that's comes back to the traditional financial services role. We look at CFPs, and 70% of CFPs are men, and that trickles out to beyond CFPs with the financial advisors.
Mhm.
And what I'm seeing is that a lot of women are leaving traditional financial planning, and they're more financial coaches,
Mhm.
and taking that approach. So, and one of the reasons is that that's a better way for them, is they also, beyond women clients, that they also don't feel like they're actively part of their financial planning firm. So, but let's take a minute and talk about how can women start to be part of the conversation. How can financial planners make them part of their conversation? How can the husband make sure that they're part of the conversation?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to that great wealth transfer conversation we had earlier on. And to me, one of the I actually get frustrated by this term because that term has been kind of thrown around as a what I would consider almost a marketing gimmick, right? It's this great wealth transfer is coming. All this money is going to be received, going to be inherited, or going to be passed down to women. We got to do some things differently. And to me, I'm like, well, why didn't you start doing things differently 10, 15, 20 years ago? Because now all these male advisors are worried about losing assets, losing revenue, losing income because they haven't focused on the woman in these conversations. They haven't, I still get these stories, unfortunately, all the time with, when I was in this appointment with my financial advisor, my husband was there, and this is even just a recent case where, if I felt like if I asked the advisor a question, my husband made me feel stupid. But if I didn't ask the question, I felt stupid. So she felt like it was just this lose-lose situation where it didn't matter what question she had or how she felt about it. She didn't feel confident that she could ask that question. And to me, that really does fall on the shoulders of financial advisors because you have to take a proactive approach. You have to be cognizant of, I can't just limit my direction of this conversation to the husband because number one, most likely he's going to be the one that passes away first. That's if you're looking at it from a business perspective, that's one way to look at it. But if you're thinking about helping the woman be involved, it maybe it's just easy as asking her opinion, asking her feeling. How do you feel about this? This is what he said. What do you think about that? You got to be proactive as the advisor, be proactive in engaging the woman in those conversations so that they feel confident, that they feel like they can ask you those questions. And that's always my advice to women. If you don't feel like you can ask a question of that financial advisor, it's time to find another financial advisor.
Financial planners going to female, mostly female-led financial planning firms, and then the clients also, especially the widows. I think, what is the stat? 80 to 90% of widows will leave their current financial planner, and pretty much they always go to a female financial planner. So it's definitely a real issue. Do you think the industry can evolve to better serve women? I mean, or is it just going to be something that happens outside the industry?
Well, I'll disagree with you to some extent. I don't know that this majority will actually go to female financial advisors. I think what they're looking for is somebody who will listen, who understands what they've gone through. And so again, we talked about my origin story and our business, our practice, and our podcast is specifically focused on, our focus is on women over 55. Whether you've been divorced, whether you've been widowed, or you're just a solo ager. There's so many more people, women specifically, that are just going through those later years on their own for whatever reason. But they're looking for somebody that will listen. And I'll be one of the first to admit that women are often better at listening than men are. And so, yes, there are going to be women who are going to be seeking out women financial advisors, but ours is a story that that's not necessarily always the case. But they're looking for somebody who will walk along that path with them, not tell them what to do, but to listen to their concerns, listen to their worries, and help build strategies around that. Not saying, okay, well, you need to do this because I said so. It's This is going to put you in the best position to live comfortably, to sleep better at night, to provide for your family, but basing your quote unquote financial plan on what you heard that woman say to you, not just as this is kind of the way we do things, so this is what you need to do as well. That's really where the differentiator becomes in the financial services world or financial advisors is, did I listen to her? Did I listen to what her worries are? Did I listen to what her concerns are and help her address those specifically in a way that she feels confident in moving forward? And that's regardless, we think about, providing advice, providing guidance from a financial advisor. That's one of the things that I'm very big on. And I think where we're talking about this transition of how financial advisors can better work with people in general, but more women specifically, is that education component, is educating first before you sell anything. There shouldn't really be, I'm a terrible salesman, I'll just be honest. I've always taken that education first approach to say, well, here's what the pros and cons, educating on your possible options, so that again, if you feel more confident in the decision you made, you're also more likely to stick with that decision over time versus within just a couple of years saying, well, why did I do that? I don't really understand that anymore. Maybe I need to do something different. Whereas if you take the time up front to educate, and you being an insurance specialist, that I'm sure you've seen this as well, especially when we're talking about life insurance products or long-term care products. It's very easy to forget why I did this in the first place, which then the next step is, well, you start second guess, well, do I really need this? But if the financial advisor, the insurance specialist educates first on, here's why we chose this amount, here's why we chose this duration, here's why we chose all these different variables, is because it helps you reach your particular goals, and educating them on those before that decision gets made so that they're much more confident in that decision. And again, much more likely to stick with those decisions going forward.
I love that. Feel confident and stick with it. And yeah, over the course of my career, is I mostly worked for other advisors, or with financial planners or trust
Mhm.
officers or litigation attorneys reviewing existing insurance policies. And that was so common, as people go, yeah, I'm not sure why I have this particular policy. Now, they might remember why they bought life insurance in
Right.
general, but they very seldom remembered, like, okay, why did I buy this whole life policy? Or why did I buy this universal life policy? Because they sit down with a financial planner and they go through and, like, okay, I don't need this cash value policy. I just need the death benefit. And so, yeah, I saw that all the time, as people were like, okay, why did I buy this? And so they're not sticky. And then they resent, they don't want to get any other life insurance. They don't want to talk about it. They're turned off, or there's anger, and it brings up all these emotions. And it's because the life insurance industry is horrible at educating and matching people to products, to their goals and where they are in life. That's a topic for another session.
Well, and I think it's especially true in our work. So our primary focus, again, if it's women over 55, it's typically when they're, you know, already in retirement or very close to it. And it really becomes a situation where if you don't do the education and you don't reinforce that education over time, there's always that feeling of, I don't have a whole lot of time. If something goes wrong, I don't have a whole lot of time to make it up. If the market goes down or this happens or that happens, there's another, almost like an extra level of stress that comes along with those retirement years, so those pre-retirement years, because you feel like time is leaving you. And so you have less chance to make things up or make things right if something bad happens. So how do we address those concerns? And again, reinforcing that education piece, asking how are you feeling about what's going on? How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? So that you constantly have that opportunity to re-educate if necessary, so they don't lose that confidence in the strategy that we have in place.
I love that, is check in to see how things are going. So one of the things, that you just talked about, and this is obviously a main focus of your podcast and your work, is retirement. Why is retirement the start of a new journey rather than the end of the road?
Well, I think there's a couple of different ways you could answer that question. One answer is simply that retirement is actually a relatively new concept across the board, right? Retirement has only been a thing for, a few generations. Before that, you just worked until you passed away and that was it. But now there's many situations where you might spend 20, 25, 30 years in retirement. So what is it that I'm doing during those years? How can I make those years more valuable and more influential in my life? That's a third of your life. So what am I doing that's going to, bring joy, bring value, bring connect me with other people in my life, connect me with hobbies and new experiences. So that's a big part of it, is saying retirement is not it. Just because you stopped working doesn't mean life is over. You're not going to sit there and just watch TV for the next 30 years and expect that to be a productive retirement. But the other way I'll answer that is for our clients, and unfortunately we've experienced this way too frequently recently, and that is, clients that have come to us after the loss of a spouse. And that's the other part of this, is saying, you here's what you thought retirement was going to look like for the last 30 years. You were going to have somebody traveling along with you when you took those trips. You're going to have somebody walking along that retirement journey with you. All of a sudden they're gone. And so now how do I put those pieces back together to still live a fulfilling life? And because in that case, it's going beyond just retirement. This is now life. How am I going to spend the next 20, 25, 30 years of my life on my own? And what I mean, not on my own, meaning you're not, there's still family, there's still friends, but you're going through life, you're going along this retirement journey on your own. And that's really where I get inspired to sit down and walk again, sit down and talk to these women that have come to us in these circumstances and say, how do we put this, what do you want life to look like from this point forward? Because there's always going to be that emotional component that's missing. But how can I help them have the best life they can going forward, where money is not the worry? Money is just a tool to allow them to achieve the things that they want to achieve, to be there for their family, to travel more, to have these experiences that, again, they thought were going to be with somebody else. And now that's not the case. So when we're talking in our case, that's kind of when I'm thinking about it, it sounds like I'm talking specifically just about retirement, but for our clients and our audience, it often goes more beyond that. It's because they're traveling through those years without that partner that's been with them for the last 20, 25, 30 years or longer. In my case, my grandparents, they were married almost 50 years. They got married very young, married almost 50 years. And they were so fortunate to say they started a business together when they were very young. They grew that business. They ultimately sold that business to my aunt and uncle. And so they actually got to retire early, and they got those years together early on, where that's where I spent most of my going to the lake and traveling, taking vacations, with spending weeks at a time with them. So they were fortunate enough to have those experiences early on in those retirement years that many women don't get to have, because you think about the average age of widowhood in the United States is about 59 and a half. And so again, it may not be retired, but it's pretty close. And so most people not necessarily being able to retire in their later 40s, early 50s, they miss out on those retirement years with that person that they spent most of their life with. And now, again, what is life going to look like going forward? And that's really what again, my inspiration as a financial advisor in our practice is, how can I be that trusted advisor to walk along that path with them, so they don't feel like, hey, I don't know who to turn to. I don't know who to call. What if I've got a financial issue? I don't know who that person is. I can't ask my husband anymore. Who can I ask? Who's the trusted person I can call and pick up the phone regardless of the situation, financial or otherwise? You'd be surprised how many of our clients will call us where it really has nothing to do with money. Everything has some direct connection to money, right? But
Yeah.
it's all kinds of different things that they'll call us about. And say, hey, can you help me with this? It could be, I'm thinking about moving. We've connected clients to physical therapists. We've connected clients to different senior living or options or opportunities, all kinds of different things that our clients call us about. But that's really the key, is they feel confident enough to say, okay, when I have an issue, I have a concern, I don't have this person to call anymore. Who do I call? And I want them to feel confident that they can call us, regardless of what their worry, their concern, what their question is.
That's awesome. And I think that's a whole new way of looking, especially in the age of AI, is that's where I think advisors are going to continue to have a role, is in that human capacity as somebody who walks along the journey, because AI is not going to be able to do that, most likely. maybe someday,
Right.
but but
I
probably
feel,
not.
yeah, I feel confident enough. We've got a little while. We got a little run time here, I think. So maybe
Definitely.
down the road that changes, but in the meantime, I'm gonna just we're just gonna keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. No, so that's a great segue to start to wrap up is I have what's called the Get Ready Hot Take Trio. These are
Yep.
three questions that I ask all of my guests. The first one is, what is one money myth you're trying to break?
Well, I'll start with that one that many women, after they lose their husband, look for a female financial advisor. I don't know that that's necessarily
All
the
right.
case. We're going to do our best to break that one. But again, I think that one ultimately comes down to who can I sit down with that will listen. That's the big thing. Who's going to listen to me and provide guidance and on that particular piece. But I think the other thing is that it's never too late. We hear those challenges that so many people haven't saved enough for retirement. It's never too late. Start where you're at, start taking the right steps today, and it's about progress, not perfection. Find your where's our baseline, and let's go from there. Let's make the right decisions, the best decisions we can going forward, but not avoid trying to feel that regret of, hey, I just haven't done so enough to this point. Let's do as much as reasonably possible as going forward.
I think that's a powerful point. It's about progress, not perfection, is because that money fills people sometimes with shame and
Mhm.
judgment and all those things. And yeah, as you point out, is not all women go to financial planners. So I should definitely restate that. It's just that I don't know if I'd say a majority, but I would say probably a majority do, or at least consider it.
Well, and
So,
I have to be completely honest. So my wife is part of our practice, and actually, so my daughter and my son are as well as of the last few months. My wife does an amazing job of finding those points of, hey, here's a great way to connect to our clients. So that's just a small gift, a card, recognizing that that maybe they just had surgery or so I have a woman's influence just to be completely transparent on that.
well, and you were influenced by strong women in
Right,
your life, and I think that changes things. I have some strong women in my life as well, I think, who've influenced me on this path. And so I think that does make a difference. I don't know if men are from women and what is it? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Maybe
right.
not quite, but we do have different ways of communicating sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. So, Eric, let's get out the time machine for a minute. If you could go back in time, knowing what you know now about money, what would you tell your younger self?
I think to a certain degree, it still goes back to what we just said, and that's that your decisions around money don't have to be perfect, but you want to ideally make them intentional. And I think, I experienced even in my younger years, you credit card debt was so easily accessible, or credit cards were so easily accessible back in the day, and you get yourself in this situation, and it creates this stress, but you don't again don't feel like you got to look back. Don't make your decisions moving forward on decisions you made in the past. Again, start where you're at. If you got some debt, what is my strategy? What is my game plan for getting out of debt? Being intentional with how I utilize my dollars versus thinking again that I've got to be perfect with every single decision. There's going to be mistakes. There's always going to be mistakes, but you can't let those mistakes just sit on your conscience and ultimately result in other mistakes that you might make. So start where you're at, be intentional moving forward. Again, just don't feel like you've got to be perfect.
Yeah, I love that. I think being intentional is so important, especially that's one way you end up in trouble, but also be intentional with the products and services you align yourself with.
Right.
That sometimes backfires on you when you're not intentional.
Right.
So, last question, Eric, is what is your number one tip for changing the way we think about money?
Don't think about money as a scorecard. Again, I talked about it, and one of the other questions was, money itself can't be the goal. Money is simply a tool for helping you achieve the things that are most important to you. Again, whether that's travel, it's experiences, it's spending time with family, it's helping a grandchild go to college, whatever those things are that drive your decisions, look at money as simply a tool or a vehicle to get you from here to there. Not as, again, the more money I have, the better off I'm going to be. They talk about money can't buy you happiness, and that to a certain extent that is true, but you can have all the money in the world, but still be completely miserable. So use money as a tool for doing the things and accomplishing the things that are truly important to you, that truly are valuable to you.
Definitely. And I would say that's the whole point of working and earning money, is so that you can do those things. And for most people, that's, I think, what they want to achieve, but they don't always understand or make
Right.
that connection, because, we're all set up to keep score with how much
Right.
money
Yep.
we earn,
Absolutely.
instead of, like, is it enough? And once you decide, like, okay, I'm going to focus on my own self, then you start to think, okay, I have enough money to do that. So that's wonderful advice. So Eric, where can listeners turn it? Where can listeners learn more about you, tune into the Simply Retirement podcast, and find out about Blake Wealth Management?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to share this. So, the Simply Retirement podcast is the podcast itself. You were recently a guest as well, but that's where we focus on. I started again every episode with "I'm not the man today. I wouldn't be the man I am today without the women in my life." But the other thing I say is that our goal is to educate and empower women to live your retirement on your terms. And that's really the focus of the podcast, is bringing those types of topics to you to help you make better decisions, more informed retirement decisions. So love you to visit the simplyretirementpodcast.com. Then you can also go to blakewealthmanagement.com. That is where our wealth management practice sits. Where again, our focus is just on thoughtful planning first conversations, helping women understand their options and move forward with confidence and clarity, again, as they're traveling along that retirement road. And again, even if you're not ready to work with a planner, we have a lot of free resources on both of those sites. Again, our goal is just to help you be more informed and more educated. So again, so you have confidence as you go through along that retirement journey.
Fantastic. And for people who are watching and listening, if you have access to the show notes, you'll find links to Eric's podcast and Blake Wealth Management in the show notes. And as people who subscribe to my newsletter have seen, is I link out quite a bit to Eric's podcast. It is, you do have an amazing podcast with
Thank
some
you.
really insightful conversations. I would recommend to everybody to check it out after you're done listening to this
That's right.
podcast.
That's right.
And thank you, everyone, as always, for tuning into this episode of Get Ready Before Life Happens. If you learned something today to change the way you think about money, please be sure to like and subscribe and to share with a friend. You can also go to my website at tonystewart.com to join the Get Ready movement, to get access to a whole bunch of free resources and my newsletter. Because life happens, get ready. Until next time.